Hi, Mike. How are you?
I'm good, Adriana. How's it going?
It's great. Thank you for joining. First of all, big welcome to all our listeners today. My name is Adriana Vega, and I am the Executive Director at Fintechs Canada. We are the industry association for financial technology companies, advocating on behalf of our members here in Canada. I'm based out of Ottawa, and I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. Mike Cascone, who you are VP of Government Relations at Xero, one of our esteemed members. Why don't you tell us a little bit about you and your role, and maybe share where you
Awesome.
are?
Great. Yes, I'm coming to everyone live from beautiful Perth, Australia, the other side of the world from where I actually am from and live, which is beautiful Port Perry, Ontario. Despite the fact that I'm wearing a Calgary shirt today, so I'm a little geographically confused. But one thing I'm not confused about is open banking today, this week. Excited to talk about it. But yeah, thanks so much for having me, Adriana. My name is Mike Cascone, like you mentioned, Vice President of Government Relations for Xero. We are a small business accounting software platform. All things from payroll to cash flow to forecasting, all in one spot. We are a New Zealand-based company, but growing very, very quickly in Canada. And the hope is that a lot of this open banking legislation that is coming through will help us continue to grow even more in Canada and refine some of our products. So very excited to be here and excited to have the chat. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, it's a very exciting time, actually. I think that if you and I had had this conversation even just a month ago, perhaps our tone and, you know, um, just kind of the entire content of this conversation might have been very different. But we are where we are today, and we're recording at the end of November. And I think that this moment is pretty key. I did a post on social media recently where kind of the leading line was it's a great time to be in fintechs in Canada. Why don't you tell our audience a little bit about why that's the case?
Well, I'll speak a little bit about Zero's perspective, my own perspective, coming from a small business background. Now, it this was a long time coming, and I think the fintech sector's um, um, extremely pleased with the way that the budget went. So, you know, I think this government has gone beyond where we even expected it to go in terms of commitments to open banking, in terms of commitments to a specific timeline, in terms of having that legislation ready to go and to be put forward as part of the BIA one. Um, why all of this matters and why it's exciting for fintechs in like Zero and in Zero space. It's really a lot of those small business applications. It really paves the way for our small business clients and our accounting and bookkeeping partners to have access to the financial information they haven't had access to. So stepping back, I'm sure this audience is already quite familiar with the concept, but really, just having access to the financial data that will allow you to make the decisions with the information that you otherwise wouldn't have in this country is such a powerful economic unlocker. You step up and you look at the broader economic ecosystem right now and economic context. Canadians are searching for productivity, searching for regulatory certainty within which to invest, searching for answers to a lot of the trade issues that have come up in supply chain, especially in their small business partners on the supply chain side, on the tariff side, and market access side. I think this just provides a really rock solid foundation for companies to get access to the information that'll help them make smarter, quicker, more efficient decisions. And I think that has such a massive trickle down throughout the economy and a ripple effect throughout the economy. So when we look at a lot of these framework financial sector regulatory pieces that are in this budget, it's not sexy. It's not something that the average Canadian is going to pick up and be like, "Oh my God, open banking!" Or like, "Oh my God, stablecoin." But these things really underpin a lot of future productivity and growth from the businesses that are really the heartbeat of our economy and
Mhm.
provide companies like a Zero regulatory certainty in which to develop product and develop our product path forward and our plans forward for investing in Canada. So I think it's a landmark budget in that it provides us a lot of direction very early in a mandate with a clearly motivated government, which is something we just haven't seen in quite some time. But I can speak to the small business impacts and kind of the Zero context all day, Adriana. I think what's really interesting to me is hearing a little bit about the broader, diverse perspectives that you're hearing on the Fintechs Canada side, because we're all pushing for very similar similar regulatory changes and legislative changes, but you get so many different perspectives on it. I'd be interested in hearing some of that as well.
Sure. Well, I mean, I love that you talked about, it's been long overdue, and actually, a big reason why Fintechs Canada exists is actually, our kind of our story is tied to the open banking journey in Canada, right? Companies who came together to advocate for more competition in the sector, and one of those pillars to boost competition is absolutely open banking. So for us, this has been a big, milestone moment where okay, now we have direction. And someone asked me recently, how is this time different? Like how, because we've been in this position before, right? It's coming and then it didn't happen. And obviously there were a lot of things in the mix, right? Like politics, there's a pandemic in between. There's been a lot of factors in the mix that have um, meant that this has stalled, right? But I think what's different, at least for me and for many of folks in membership, I think is just um, this direction, that's really coming from the government to really incentivize competition, right? Because at the end of the day, it's what is the goal? And I think that maybe that vision was not as clearly defined in the past, whereas now you can see the objective, right? Like we want to make sure
Yeah.
that competition is doing what it needs to do for the benefit of consumers and businesses. And this is kind of the plan and the strategy that goes with it to make sure that that happens. And I think even before the government tabled the legislation, when it was all part of the budget announcement a couple of weeks ago, even there from the early days you could already see that sort of directional path that they were taking, aligning kind of a strategy behind the regulator, setting timelines, kind of setting some indications on data regulations, data sharing regulations. So all of that just kind of signaled to us, okay, this time it's real and this time it's happening. And now, this week, they've tabled the legislation. It was the first
Yeah.
time that our membership and ourselves here at Fintechs Canada were able to see a lot of the details, like because the devil's in the detail. And I think so far we do see a lot of positives in there. We're actually quite pleased with what we're seeing. The fact that the scope of the businesses that are captured under the legislation is great. It's all businesses, not just small businesses. The scope of the data that can be shared. Putting in rules early on in legislation that prohibit participants from charging and establishing a high bar to sharing the data. I think all of those things are foundational, and it really kind of sets the stage for the next stage, right? Because in many ways, the job is kind of only just getting started. The foundation's there, but now we need to build a house. And so I think for us as a stakeholder and as an association is the work really kind of just starts now, right? It's like the next season of open banking, if you want to see it that way, where we're going to engage with government on the development of the regulations to make sure that it actually serves the intended purpose, right? Which is bring about more competition, give consumers more choice, and to your point, how crucial is it to give small and medium enterprises the ability to choose different products? We know when we talk about challenges in Canada, like productivity, for example, or scaling up companies, how much of that is related actually to the capacity of these small businesses to tap into capital and tap into more efficiencies in the management of their financials. So I really do think that it's not going to be something that you see overnight, but over time I think we're going to see an incremental effect on our small business community, and consumers are going to become more and more comfortable with seeking other options for them. So
100%. You touched on two funny things that like I have been saying that this is 2 years away to my colleagues for like 5, 6 years now.
they
So
believe you.
just I might need to find a new job because I'm gonna need something else to talk about. But I think ultimately like it's true. I think we've had this sense of momentum and the sense of optimism for so long, and to actually have it, um, to have that vision, to your point, to have a vision clearly stated there, with so many different pieces, in terms of like empowering challenger banks, and I mentioned the stablecoin piece, like so, aligned with the RPAA and the Bank of Canada, to have like a foundation and a vision there actually articulated is huge. But you're scaring me a bit because I know you're right in that the work is still to come. We got to hammer this out and make sure that it's something that's usable, and that the FIs are all going to collaborate and the fintechs are all going to want to participate, and all small businesses that a Xero works with are going to be educated and understand how to access the system and what it means for their business. And our accounting and bookkeeping community understands how to change their advisory role. Like there's so many different pieces in the ecosystem, and there's so much work to do. So I feel like the whole fintech sector, I think, has been um, so pleased with the vision and the way the direction of travel. But you're very right to say stop and think for a second because we do have work to do.
Yeah.
And Fintechs Canada is like such a key part of aligning that sector's feedback, right, and making sure that we're all able to access and to play ball and to work together.
Thank you. I mean, I do think that industry unity is key, right? Because obviously the government, this is not the only file the government is working on,
Yeah.
right? There's multiple things happening at the same time. Um, there's a lot of, when you're in government, I think that a lot of it is just issues management, right? There's a lot of things that are happening, and so this is not their sole focus. And so for us as an industry, I feel like we are going through a moment where we've seen a big win, right? All the things that we're advocating for the last 7, 10 years, they're coming to fruition. Like I said before, the foundation has been laid out, and now it's really up to us to kind of come meet them and tell them what are the things that actually will help drive the goal that we've set out, and that I think, at least for now, the government is certainly aligned with, which is greater competition, greater productivity, and how the financial services sector can actually be a catalyst for those goals, right? So for us as an industry association, our role is obviously to convene industry players and come up with recommendations for the government. And what I've heard so far, in studying, especially the open banking file, things like access, to make sure that innovators have access, that
Yeah.
the accreditation process is, first of all, that it is risk based, right? Don't create any unnecessary barriers to entry. That it's well calibrated for different participants in the ecosystem. Things I mentioned about competition, right? And I think we can study other markets in the world where perhaps the intent was competition, but then in the end, when the regulations rolled out, there were certain things that didn't actually enable that competition to happen in practice. So we've been slow to implement, but I think that maybe now we can tap into some of those case studies elsewhere in the world to say, like, there's things that could have worked differently and things that we can learn from. So I'm very optimistic, and I personally am very excited to this next stage of work. How are you guys thinking about it from the lens as a global company?
So as a global company, I think it's we're excited. I think it's been taking the small businesses aside that we service and the accountants and bookkeepers that we work with, it's hard for a global company to unleash the full breadth of its global product offerings when the fundamental data on which all of those product offerings rely has been unreliable, slow, and inefficient. So for us, having a way to get these bank feeds all standardized, completely on within a governance framework that is governed by, a government regulator, completely, mandatory for participation, able to be used by, through an accreditation framework. And that's something that obviously we're going to have to be talking to government about. That's one of those issues that I think we're going to have to flesh out and get into the weeds a little bit on what an accreditation framework looks like, what the standards look like. But um, having that certainty opens up just a world of product offerings on the Xero side and just enhances our competitiveness, makes us want to invest more in Canada. I think it's been a major blocker for us so far. And I think I could say the same for a lot of our competitors and counterparts and partners in the fintech ecosystem. Just having that certainty is absolutely huge. But you're right, the devil's still in the details. And I think being a global player, it's been interesting to watch. Like so much of this has been done. We operate in the UK, for example, where the first rollout of that system was not perfect. There were bumps in the road. But not bad bumps. Bumps where you need to, collaborate as an ecosystem again and figure out and work with government. And I think it's incumbent upon the fintech sector generally. There's sometimes this is going to be a hot take, Adriana. I'm sorry, this is going to be a very hot take. I think the fintech sector can sometimes be a little bit publicly dissatisfied all the time, and I think our narrative can sometimes be publicly a little disparate. And I think this is a real opportunity for us to come together as a sector, say what's important here is getting this over the line, and really coming to the table to work with government and our financial institution partners, many of which we all partner with anyways, to hammer out something that is really accessible and really works because it's happening now and we're moving towards it. So I think from a global perspective, it's taking lessons from like the UK, for example,
Yes.
where it wasn't perfect. There are going to be Canada specific challenges along the way. We obviously have an interest in making sure that small businesses have full access to this, but all types of businesses are included and all types of businesses should be able to benefit from it. So how do we get to that end line in a way that's fast but safe for the consumer, for the small business, in a way that brings FIs and fintechs along for the journey? I think our industry associations have a great role to play and a voice there.
Mhm.
But I think the way we're looking at this at Xero is like, A, finally, like, B, this is awesome. Like we're excited because it can open up a world of opportunity for our growth here in Canada, for the growth of our partners and clients.
That's great, Mike. Thank you. I love your comments and I love your enthusiasm and candid comments because, as a disruptor industry, I think we can consider ourselves challenger industry. Those voices can sometimes be a little fragmented, right? So it's as fintechs, it's really nice to see. I mean, our own growth kind of mirrors a lot of the evolution in our industry, and seeing that unity and kind of all coming together and coming to government, making recommendations. You can see that it's having an impact. So it's really something
Oh
that's
my gosh, even just like the size of relief and like I think people are ready, back to the work comment, people are ready to get to work, right? Like we have some
yes,
advocates, like look at some of the, you look at even some of the Fintechs Canada members that have been around the table for so long. A lot of your board members, like banks like Wealth Simple have like we've been grinding on this forever, but we have like, advocates in the industry like an Abraham Tachian who did such a fantastic job like bringing stakeholders into a very inclusive consultation process and has been really principled in his approach and his advocacy on this topic. It's
totally.
it's such a uniting moment, but it's also like an energizing one. I haven't felt this kind of energy in the sector in a very long time.
Well,
I
I'd
think it's like
actually
everyone's ready to work. Yeah.
You're ready. I would love to get your take. You were in the stakeholder lockup here in Ottawa. When they're going to unveil the budget, they give a preview. Under embargo to stakeholders, and so when you get an invitation to attend the embargo, it usually signals, okay, there's either something in it in the budget that is of interest to my industry or my company, or there's something really bad for my industry or my company, right? Like that's usually kind of a good sort of sense check. But you were in the room and you just talked about, the big sigh of relief. What was, if we can talk about the vibe, what was the vibe like in the room with all these stakeholders? Share with our audience today.
The federal lockup is a really funny experience because you have so many stakeholders there, and they're all leaders of their industries. And one very quick, if I could tell a very quick funny story, I didn't realize that the USBs that they would hand out would not be allowed to be accessed on my encrypted work for a cloud accounting software company, and I tried to plug a USB into it. So I
Doesn't
actually had
work.
to wait for the paper copies to come out. Well, all the stakeholders are all in there typing up their responses. I'm sitting there like thumbing through a paper copy looking for all the notes on open banking. So that was a bit of a tough start for me. But I would say the vibe in the room was celebratory, almost sigh of relief. It's a bit
Mhm.
nerve-wracking because you expect something positive for your industry, but you don't know until you know. A lot of those stakeholders in there have media lined up for immediately after. So you have to come out with an opinion. But I will say the minister's office staff was fantastic. They were there to answer questions. I think there was a great detensioning when we saw some of the language. But then again, a big thought around, okay, so what does this mean for us now? And I think, well, I saw you in Ottawa that night. I know you were definitely buzzing around. I'd be interested to hear kind of some of the conversations that you had, especially coming from the background that you come from in the industry. What some of the broader perspectives were and how people are feeling about it, both within and outside the Fintechs Canada membership base.
Well, you know what's interesting? I think that if I take a step back, like obviously I'm very deeply like you immersed in fintech, but then sometimes it's kind of good to take a step back and just see like, okay, how are the other sectors kind of doing? What's the reaction out there for the overall um, piece, the budget and the politics. And I think that the budget um, as a document in itself, actually the fintech side is actually a pretty
Yeah,
small
it is.
component of it.
Yeah.
Like all these big investments in defense and infrastructure, obviously you can see, the priorities for government are very much aligned with what the electoral, platform was about, right? Affordability, investing in Canada. And I think that that really is the big banner of it. What I really liked seeing, and I think resonated out there in other corners outside of the fintech space, is just this focus on competition, and even a few weeks earlier, the prime minister had done a speech where he spoke about competition, and a few days after that, after that, the deputy governor
Yep.
of the Bank of Canada was also out there talking about competition. You're hearing this from other regulators like OSFI. They're talking about competition. So I think that all of the things that we've been hearing over the past few years around, our stagnant growth, our issues around productivity, I really think that they are resonating with folks in government, policymakers, and I'm starting to see a very clear shift in that
Yeah.
direction, right? Like, what are the ingredients that we need to introduce in the economy to make sure that we inject that dynamism? And of course, I was particularly pleased to see that banner of competition. There's two sectors included in the bucket of competition. One of them is financial services. So for us, that is super refreshing. I feel like it's something that many in our sector said, "Oh, we're being heard," because we've been
Felt like
saying that
that.
for
It
so
felt like
long.
that. It was
Um,
like this. Oh my God. We've been talking about this. Yeah.
Totally. And so I think that it's getting a lot of attention, and I think that it's getting attention not just from outside the sector, but even different verticals within the fintech space. Like we traditionally in our early days we were Paychecks of Canada, so like we're very kind of in tune with the advocacy sort of pitch of folks in the payment space, but we've grown and we represent many other verticals in the fintech space, and increasingly I am hearing from others in the space, because our sector is of course very diverse and there's many different kinds of companies of all sizes out there. And I think a big source of just energy and just excitement for me is just to see all these different companies in the ecosystem all over Canada kind of raise their hands and say, this means a lot to me and this is actually going to make a big difference for me. How do I get engaged? How do I participate in this process? Like, how do I make sure that I am, doing my compliance the right way, that I'm reporting the right way. I applied to be under the Bank of Canada to be a regulated entity for payments. How do I make sure that I'm accredited, that I report correctly? So all of that tells me, this industry has really hit a new level in its maturity, and the next phase is just going to be all that more exciting.
Oh, absolutely. 100% agree. I think it's an enthusiasm. I think it's a ready to work. And, in terms of like the broader ecosystem now gaining awareness of some of the stuff that we've been banging on the table, kind of talking about forever. And it's a shame it's taken um, a borderline economic crisis not economic crisis, but some productivity challenges for us
Sure.
to get to the point where it's like, okay, we realize that this is an idea that needs to be implemented. But a big part of my job and of Xero's role in this ecosystem is educating our partner base. So educating small businesses, educating accountants and bookkeepers on what's coming, why it matters. And we are just seeing such a renewed focus on this too, because people are seeing that budget language like, oh my God, so this is real now. Mike, you've been talking about this for
It's
talking
real.
about this for 5 years.
Why?
We just thought this was baloney. No, this is actually coming now. Tell us how we need to operate in this system. So I think as some of the
Absolutely.
news and it gets around on progress being made with the government tabling legislation so quickly and this being pushed forward, I think we're going to get so many more diverse voices coming to the table saying like, okay, I want to make sure that like my constituents are prepared for this. You're going to get chambers of commerce, industry associations, you're going to get all sorts of different sectors saying like, how does this impact me? Because it will, and it will impact in a very positive but very foundational way. So I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of that exact type of conversation that you mentioned in the
Absolutely.
next couple months. And I think it's incumbent upon players like us to actually have those conversations and educate as much as possible. It can't be all government all the time, right?
I completely agree. And we ourselves at fintechs, we're doing more. work to reflect that need that's out there in the market. As a lot of our members are, they're now going to be accredited with the Bank of
Yeah.
Canada, and once the stablecoin framework is in place, that's going to be another
Yeah.
accreditation. Well, actually, there was some conversation in the Senate recently where it's going to be ultimately it's going to be one accreditation for all these different things, right? But they need to roll this out, and they need to implement this, and so eventually, a lot of these companies will be accredited by the Bank of Canada to provide A, B, or C services in the financial technology space. And we need to adapt ourselves as an industry association. So we're talking more and more about regulation. How do I get engaged in the regulatory process? How do I report? What is the well, like? It's one thing to apply for accreditation, and something else to be part of the annual sort of reporting process. And so we ourselves are setting up a committee for practitioners specifically on the compliance space, because this is a very rapidly growing space for our members, our fintechs, and certainly for their
Well,
clients as well.
I
So
wanted to
I,
ask how
I'm
Fintechs was feeling about the all the changes on the compliance side that are going to be coming, right? And the accreditation side and the lining up of so many different major framework streams that your members have such a great interest in, all under the Bank of Canada, which is like this is a non-traditional role for a central bank to take. So I cut you off to ask the question that you were already answering, but it's something that's always that has been very front of mind. So I like, yeah, it's an interesting position for fintechs to be in.
Yeah, well, I think one thing that's very positive for us and for the Bank of Canada too is that sort of single point of
I
contact,
love
right?
that.
It's like we now have one regulator that is it seems to be really in line with things that we're talking about, right? Like pro competitions, like resiliency of the financial system. They have the tools, and then they can engage with us as sort of the voice representing fintech, whether you are in the digital asset
Yeah.
space, whether you are in open banking or in payments. It really helps that interaction. And again, it's reflective of kind of how our industry continues to mature, and ourselves as industry, right? There's not one single point of contact in each of the fintechs that we represent, right? Oftentimes you have the founders, the CEOs who sit on our committees and come to our meetings, but oftentimes they will have, like their chief compliance officer, or their head of legal, or different folks at different fintechs will have more knowledge to contribute, and more kind of things that they can bring to the table, so that we can bring a very robust set of recommendations and feedback for government. So all of that, of course, it means that we need to, you know, increase the level of sophistication that we have, and how we, gather feedback from our members, how we consolidate that and kind of bring it to government in a way that is, well calibrated, I guess, to the things that they are able to do, and have a good justification for the things that we're asking for. But I think so far, I've only been impressed by both the level of engagement that I've seen from members and from government as well. Mike, before we
Yeah.
wrap it up, I want to ask you. You're very close to the small business community. Why don't you tell me about, what is a challenge that you hear right now from some of Xero's, client base? What are some of the challenges that they're facing right now when it comes to handling their finances, that you can see a very clear sort of role for things like open banking to resolve over
Oh,
time? Like, what would you
I
say?
love talking about small business use cases. And circling back to the previous, because I love talking about government relations as well. This is a fantastic conversation, Adriana. But circling back to the previous one, when you're like, okay, what was the vibe in lockup? When we saw the language, it was all competition language in there. There was no mention of small business. And I know small businesses were covered under some of the previous legislation and some of the previous work that had been done by the previous government. Now, when I didn't see small businesses in there, my heart was in my throat because I'm like, oh my God, I hope this system can still be beneficial and accessed by small businesses, because I think, and I truly, truly believe this. This isn't Mike from Zero talking. This is Mike from Port Perry talking. I truly believe the small business use case is the most critical use case here. I think it has such an opportunity to solve so many issues that we're seeing on our main streets. So stepping back to actually answer your question and not just tell stories. Right now the small business ecosystem in Canada is it's having a tough time. Like what we're seeing through our aggregated data is sales are still year over year down, and like it has been quite some time of year over year sales either not hitting projections or like noticeably down. So now you got small businesses that aren't really getting uh, reliable sales numbers, as they would have a couple years ago. So that's one factor. A second factor is, you have late payments. We're seeing that late payments are still really, really high. Time to be paid, really, really high. So now you got bad sales on the whole. You got payments that aren't reliably coming in on time. So now you're getting, there's liquidity issues. We're seeing interest rates are still not really matching where economic performance is. So there's another strike. It's tough to access capital. Our lending system is notoriously not really favorable for small businesses. So we don't have a lot of risk capital. We definitely don't have risk capital for Main Street businesses. We don't have interest rates that are appealing for them from an ops or even a growth perspective. So what we're seeing right now is kind of like a malaise, an inability to grow or to invest in proper channels. So we're seeing small businesses that are maybe not shutting down locations. Some of them would be, some of the multiple locations would be, but not able to invest in growth. So things like fixing signs and plumbing, things like marketing and brand is a big one that gets cut. Where it's like, okay, well, we don't need a brand campaign. If I'm a Main Street business in Port Perry, Ontario, like I don't need to spend for social media support right now. Like, people come walk by the store, I guess, right? Like it's this trickle on of information or decisions that are all borne by low sales, low liquidity, and now supply chain issues. You can't access the US market the way you once did. Where are your products coming from? It might not be the same place next week. So it's uncertainty, it's low liquidity. And so how does open banking solve all this? Access to information is just so, so, so huge. Being able to have
Mhm.
reliable bank feeds in a product like Xero or any of our competitors um, allows you to unlock all the fintech tools that are available in other parts of the world in a reliable and safe
Totally.
and efficient and immediate manner, right? So now, if you're a small business in Port
Mhm.
Perry, you're saying, okay, so sales have been down. I'm starting to run out of a little bit of cash here. Okay, how's open banking going to change that? Well, it'll say, okay, here's where your money is. It's not going to take 5 days for your transfer to come in. It's going to take one, and here's your accounts receivable are all here. Now we're going to build this into your cash flow projection based on current sales numbers that are connected right to your POS, your Lightspeed system, or whatever it is. Um, Having the power of information to make financial decisions when you don't have a lot of liquidity is such a massive efficiency unlocker. Can I hire someone or do I
Absolutely.
need to invest more in product X? Well, you can make those decisions with the right information now. The other major
Absolutely.
factor is that risk capital coming in. There's going to be so many alternative lenders that now have access. When you look at some of the challenger bank stuff, that you take that aside, there's going to be alternative lenders that come in with bigger risk appetites for small businesses. We're going to be able to bring in capital
Mhm.
from the private sector, from other countries to get working for Canadian businesses to help solve some of these issues. They're going to have access to a broader suite of small businesses' financial history and financial data. Beautiful. Now they can start adding risk capital to the system that isn't necessarily from government pockets or from Canadian pockets. There are so many different ways that this can really fundamentally impact the way the Canadian small businesses operate, given the context we're in. But even something just as small as like efficiency of the small business owner. Spend less time worrying about this and more time growing your business. That's what I've been saying for years. And it's like just unlocking the value of their time, I think goes a long way. So like, oh, I could talk about this forever,
I
Adriana. I love talking about the
love
small business.
it. I love the passion. Love the passion for small business. You've definitely gotten me excited about small business. So, I mean, I always have been, but this is just great. The way that you explained in real terms what it means, and it can be, you know, whether they make payroll or not, and whether they stay open or not.
100%. These are
So,
life or death situations. And I'm gonna jump on my small town horse again. You know I love to do this is like these small businesses are the lifeblood of our small town communities and economies, right? Like it isn't just like a coffee shop in Toronto might go under. Oh well. These are communities that are invested in these jobs and in these people and these businesses growing. Whether the franchises or not, it's really, really meaningful for a huge chunk of Canada. So having that reflected,
I agree.
and I think, how is Fintechs Canada feeling, I guess, as we talked about the education, what do you see as like the industry's role in starting to, and fintech's role in starting to push some of these initiatives out? Because I see Xero having a huge role, but I'm thinking now, like, man, how do we get small business owners to actually understand what this means more and be ready to implement these tools as soon as they're available? How is fintechs feeling about some of that?
That is a
It's
very
a,
good
it's a,
question, Mike,
it's a
and
tough
I
one.
wish I had an answer because we have to wear
Yeah,
many hats, and but I do think that part of the success of our open banking framework will rest on
yeah,
adoption, and knowing that the consumers and the small businesses will be empowered to make better, more informed decisions with the safety that will give them to know that this framework has accredited all these different stakeholders in the ecosystem, right? It won't feel like, oh, can I trust them with my data? It's like there's going to be a whole rules framework
yeah,
behind it. And so there is a strong role to play for all of us in the industry, for us as an industry body, to really kind of work on that awareness and in many ways remove the abstract concept that exists around open
yeah,
banking, right? Because like if I go outside and I talk to my neighbors and I go on about open banking, like it's not relatable, right? Like people don't really, well, what does it mean? Like I don't really want to give my data, it's kind of, but data is already out there. And so I think it's just providing people with that sense of a comfort, that this is safe, in many ways open banking will actually address things around
yeah,
security. And why does this make a difference for you, consumer, right? Like why a better choice is actually going to mean that your traditional financial service provider maybe now has tried to try a little bit harder for your business, so just kind of making the case for why this is important and why having more agency is important. It's going to just kind of accelerate the rate of adoption and ultimately incent even more innovation,
yeah.
right? Which is kind of what I
Well,
want to
it's
see.
like there's the trust pillar, building the trust in the system, which I think work needs to be done there. And then there's the actually like increasing adoption from like a business optimization standpoint. Like, here's what this means for you. Get excited about it, right? I see definitely there's those two pillars, but yeah, I think you and I have probably both been running into the same issue for a long time. It's like no one really wants to talk about open banking to you. Like it's such a nebulous concept. It's challenging to really drive to the heart of what this actually means. And I think it'll definitely take a whole of sector approach, but then also bringing in the other sectors too that are going to be impacted by this and educating them and letting those industry associations roll out to their membership and so on and so forth. Yeah.
That's a great. You're giving me a lot of
Uh,
ideas, Mike. So thank you. Well, I think we've
yeah.
run out of
Awesome.
time. This has been such a great conversation, Mike. Always great to see you. I know that you're all across the world right now, so safe travels. Thanks again for joining, and I'm really excited to our next conversation, whenever that
Dude,
may be.
thank you so much. I will bring back some open banking research from the land down under here in Australia. Thank you so much to you and to Fintechs Canada. You guys have been such fantastic advocates on behalf of the sector. And I do hope you did take a moment to celebrate a win in the budget, even though I think all of our minds are going to work. But thank you so much for having me. It's been great having this conversation.
This is great. Thank you so much, Mike. Take care. Thanks, everyone.